This episode of The Spiritual Edge is brought to you by Templeton Religion Trust. We're changing the conversation about religion, together with you and all who are curious. Join the conversation at templetonreligiontrust.org.
One time this guy, I don't want to call him a racist, he came up to me and he's like, "Hey, you, go back to your country." And I was like, "Okay, I'm here. Whose job do I need to steal to get those free welfare benefits?"
From KALW and The Spiritual Edge, this is Becoming Muslim. I'm Hanat Baba. On this last episode in our series, we're going to explore a clash that can sometimes happen between faith and culture. For women, there's a lot to think about after they become Muslim. Wearing the hijab if they choose to, dealing with expectations of marriage if they're single. Do they marry another convert or someone who grew up in the faith? I can tell you a lot of pressure comes with being a Muslim woman. You have to think about your identity, all the stereotypical images.
Islam was probably the last religion I would have ever seen myself as converting to. Having this image of these women who were so oppressed and covered up.
Sofie Lovern is a stand-up comedian from Oakland, California. She's 45, wears a hijab, and has these round pink cheeks that turn red whenever she's giggling. And she laughs a lot. She's constantly cracking jokes about her life and all the parts that make up who she is.
I'm actually half Hispanic, half Mexican, half white, and 100% Muslim. And thank you. And it does cause a little cultural confusion from time to time. What do I do when I get excited? Is it like, hoi, aha, hi, golly gee?
This comedy club called Copper Spoon is where Sofie comes every Tuesday night.
It feels like home. And it's so warm, and literally warm. It's always warm in here. There's not a lot of Muslim stand-up comedians. I mean, they're out there, but most of them joke about just regular people stuff, I've noticed. Like, it'd be like a guy named Muhammad, but he's talking about that time he was so high on cocaine and he was in San Francisco and blah, 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 But then I get up there and make jokes about being a Muslim comedian.
And she's had plenty of material to work with in a post-9/11 America.
Like I say, I can't ever bomb on stage. Because I'm one bad joke from Guantanamo.
One bad joke from Guantanamo, I'm telling you right now. At least I know the lyrics to Guantanamera in Spanish, so yeah. So we're good.
When she first became Muslim in 1996, Sofie was living hard times, but she had this curiosity about life, about faith. Converting to Islam felt like a new beginning. But sometimes what comes after conversion is more complicated and unexpected. And in Sofie's case, it would end up testing her new faith. Sofie grew up in Southern California. Her family was Catholic, not too religious, but her family life was unstable. Her dad left when she was 18. She and her mom struggled to make ends meet. She had to drop out of college to make money. Things got so bad, she became homeless. She left LA and moved north to stay with family in the Bay Area. And it was a cousin who got her interested in Islam. She hung out with her a lot. They were both questioning the Christianity they grew up with. They talked about God, and they both started researching other religions.
I got a used Quran, and I got a used biography of the Prophet Muhammad, and like all the stuff I bought was used. And so I went and started reading up and realized, oh, wow, this is exactly what I think.
As Sofie read more and more, she says things started to fall into place.
If it makes sense, if it's logical, then I can accept it. You know what I mean? Even if it was completely new and foreign to me.
As she contemplated Islam internally, things on the outside weren't going so well. Sofie got pregnant, and things were rocky with her boyfriend.
My son's father left me, and he ran back to Mexico because I didn't know how I was going to tell him that I was planning on becoming Muslim, and then he left, and so he made that part easy because he took off on me.
Now Sofie was on her own, pregnant and going to school. Her life was hard and it was busy, and that internal spiritual search was happening at the same time. Then her cousin, the one who was studying religions with her, she got to the point where she was converting to Islam.
So I went to her ceremony. I actually was pretty ready to be Muslim, but I waited because, like I said, I was reading the biography of the Prophet's life. I wanted to finish that, and because I don't jump into things, I felt like it was a very serious decision.
Sofie did more reading and sat with herself a lot. Then she decided. Sofie went to the mosque where her cousin had converted, and surrounded by the congregation, she gave her shahada, the testimony of faith that makes you a Muslim. Nothing had prepared her for how intense that moment would be. She still feels it today.
So I'm a little emotional. But, I felt like I had kind of messed up to that point.
She thought about her unborn son, about his dad, her financial struggles, her whole life.
So, they say that when you convert and you take your shahada, that all your sins are forgiven. Take your time. And if I could tell you that in that moment, you can feel it. You can feel it happen. I don't know how else to describe it. It's like being washed or something, but not with water, but with light. I got hugs from all the ladies, and they all welcomed me into Islam, and it was a beautiful moment. Like I said, I had seen my cousin go through it, and it was beautiful for her as well.
Sofie admired her cousin's experience. She wanted that for herself. But her cousin had also gone through something else right after she converted.
She ended up getting married right away. She married another convert.
Sofie wanted to get married too, and in her new mosque community, that was expected. So within a few weeks of becoming Muslim, Sofie says the imam told her since she was single and pregnant, she should get married, and that he would help her find a husband. Sofie went along with it. She had a baby son on the way, and marriage didn't sound like a bad idea. The imam was from Morocco, and he'd regularly make trips home. And on one trip...
When he had gone to Morocco, apparently, he had brought back some photos and little bios for guys that he wanted to find wives for. And there were several choices, I guess.
Hi, this is Judy Silber, executive editor of The Spiritual Edge. We'll get back to the story shortly, but I'm here to remind you that more stories from the Becoming Muslim series are available by looking for The Spiritual Edge in your podcast player. Or you can go to our website, thespiritualedge.org. That's also where you can donate to the project. We're so proud of the Becoming Muslim series, but this kind of journalism isn't cheap. Believe it or not, we started planning back in 2017, and it took a whole team to make it happen. If you appreciate this kind of sensitive, in-depth storytelling, please consider making a donation. We are committed to bringing you more thoughtful journalism about religion and spirituality, but we need your help. So go to our website, thespiritualedge.org, and make a donation today. We appreciate your listening and your support. Now back to the story.
The imam recommended a man from his old neighborhood in Morocco. He spoke Spanish, Sofie did too, so they started corresponding, and very quickly, the man made an offer.
Come to Morocco and visit, and if you like me, then we'll get married, is kind of what his offer was. And that seemed okay. And I didn't have anyone warning me not to do it, and it seemed like a great opportunity. I could go there and learn about Islam and learn how to speak Arabic and maybe find, a nice romantic relationship with someone who, we support each other. And that was not really the reality.
People who work in Muslim marriage spaces say it's not uncommon to hear about mosque leaders finding matches for new convert women who are single, in some cases as soon as they become Muslims.
you're a convert. Why is somebody automatically bringing you someone to marry? Why is that like the first thing?
This is Jenny Triplett. She and her husband Rufus are a marriage counselor couple that have worked with Muslim American communities for decades.
And I would never, ever suggest that a sister is coming to this dean go get married like right off the bat.
Well, we always suggest people, when you first convert, learn the religion. There's no need to rush into marriage.
Jenny says people sometimes put too much trust in mosque leaders to manage their personal affairs.
Islam definitely tells you not to put faith in man. You're putting all your faith and all
somebody
this trust
you don't know
in this man that you don't know, because the sheikh and imam, he's still just a man.
And likewise, she says, putting all the blame on the imams is misguided too.
How much research are you doing? I don't care how new you are. You
ain't new to life.
You're putting so much, on the imam, but what didn't you do?
Sofie admits that at the time, she was starry-eyed and maybe naive. Juliette Gallonier researches converts to Islam. She's a political science professor at Sciences Po in Paris. She says vulnerability is a big issue for converts like Sofie.
Especially for those who try to convert by themselves, so who did their own personal research in books or on the internet, but who didn't really have a strong network of Muslim friends. So these people talk a lot in interviews about their vulnerability as new Muslims. So the vulnerability really comes from that experience of loneliness.
And Sofie was now in a vulnerable place. So she continued corresponding with the man in Morocco, and she traveled there with her 8-week-old son.
I mean, I went over there and, like the day after I got there, he's like, I love you and I want to marry you. And I was like, okay, it just seemed really good. Everything seemed good.
But soon, things were far from good. They got married, but Morocco was a total culture shock, and Sofie started to struggle.
Moving into an environment where you don't speak the language, they have completely different culture. We had squat toilets only, so I had to learn how to use a squat toilet. And because I speak Spanish, and my ex-husband, he spoke French, Spanish, and Arabic, so he learned English, I learned Arabic. And we used Spanish until we learned enough of each other's languages to communicate a little bit better, and there were a few misunderstandings along the way.
Sofie says she tried to get used to the culture, the people, the mannerisms, because she thought she was in Morocco for the long haul, that this was going to be her new home.
But within 3 weeks, he was pushing me to come back here.
Her husband wanted them to live in the U.S.
We did go try to get him a visa, and we went to the American consulate, and we were denied. And then we found out later that I could come here and apply. So once he figured that out, he sent me back here.
Sofie came back to the U.S. and filed for permanent residency for her husband. He joined her 9 months later, but she says it soon became an unhappy marriage. She says her husband would say things like,
women aren't supposed to talk, they're supposed to cook and clean and never sit down. He was very threatened if I was resting. He didn't even like me to sit and crochet. I like to make things, so crochet blankets, and he said that was being lazy.
And there was another big thing, and it had to do with a core part of who she was. She loved comedy. She cracked jokes wherever she went. She's a big laugher, finding humor all around her. And she says her husband just didn't get any of it.
He had no sense of humor, And one day I asked him, I said, how long was the surgery? He said, what surgery? I said, the one where they removed your sense of humor, But he didn't laugh. He never laughed.
And comedy, it was a big part of what she wanted to do with her life. She says he discouraged her from pursuing it at all.
It was torture. It was torture living with someone who didn't get any of my jokes, didn't laugh at any of my jokes. He was always like, the Moroccan ladies don't do that. Okay, well then marry a Moroccan. I don't know what to tell you. You didn't marry a Moroccan lady. I'm not going to behave like one, whatever that means. He spent 10 years telling me who to be, but he never found out who I was. Why are you so dead set on changing me as a human,
The triplets, the marriage counselors, have seen this a lot. Here's Jenny again.
There's a lot of questions that you need to ask before marriage, but it definitely, if you're entertaining someone who is an immigrant, foreign born, What are your ideas? Do you know American culture? Do you respect American culture? Because if you are expecting me to learn your culture, live with your culture, gravitate to your culture, there has to be some mutual respect.
Sofie eventually filed for divorce. I didn't interview Sofie's ex-husband, but I did track down the imam who connected Sofie with her husband all those years ago, Yasser Chadli. He confirms many of the details of the story, including that he introduced her to her ex-husband in the first place.
He didn't have any bad things like drugs or drunk or something. And then he wanted to raise this boy as a father to him. That was my essential connection that I wished for her. That was it.
He says his intention was to help Sofie. He hasn't had much contact with her since the wedding 25 years ago, but he did hear about her struggles with her husband and her husband's behavior towards her and her divorce.
I felt bad about it because that was not my wish that this will happen. Of course, when you lead people to be together, you wish for them the best thing.
And now, he says, he wishes he'd been more present.
I never sat with her to ask her, how is this man? How is he treating you? And I never sat between them and continued to groom them to become good. I just expected they will do good with each other. Yeah.
And thinking back, Chadli suspects that maybe the man he thought was such a good match for Sofie really just wanted to marry her so he could come to the U.S. Over the years, Chadli has seen a lot, and he says he's changed his mind altogether about these kinds of marriages.
I think most of it doesn't work. 99%, I would say, it doesn't work. Yeah, it's very difficult.
It certainly didn't work for Sofie. She ended up alone with 3 children, cut off from her mosque community, and starting to question why she chose Islam in the first place.
I had to come full circle again and remember why I converted, and remember that it had nothing to do with Moroccan culture. It had nothing to do with him and his misogyny. But I had to stop and separate myself from that cultural bullcrap and what the religion says, because a lot of it is absolutely in contradiction to what the religion says.
Sofie needed to heal, and she says, to rediscover herself.
Yeah, there was a time though right before I left him that I think I had almost given up. I was kind of a shell of myself, But what I found is after I left, it was like a rubber band that had been stretched. It just went right back. You know what I mean? It just snapped right back.
Rediscovery for Sofie meant getting back to who she was, and a big part of that was humor and comedy.
One time this guy, I don't want to call him a racist, came up to me and he's like, "Hey, you, go back to your country." And I was like, "Okay, I'm here."
I have a weird brain. I have this sort of constant stream of hilarity running through my brain. I'm never bored. I'm rarely lonely. And my brain keeps me entertained.
And she knew comedy for her wasn't just funny thoughts in her head. It was more. She was raised on comedy.
I studied it by watching a lot of stand-up when I was a kid. And I loved Robin Williams and George Carlin and Stephen Wright. And
you watched George Carlin when you were?
Oh, yeah. He was amazing.
And she knew she had a talent. So, a couple of years after her divorce, she felt she was ready to go on stage.
So, I never get greeted at Walmart. Does this happen to anyone else? Every time I go in, there's like those twin greeters, and they're looking at each other like, I'm not going to greet her, you greet. You going to greet her? But CVS, on the other hand, they have like excellent customer service. And by customer service, I mean surveillance. I just started coming here and I hung out until they put me up, basically. And then I guess I did well enough that now they put me up pretty much. If I come, sometimes yeah.
I mean, I've heard the jokes like a million times, but they're still funny,
On this day, just before the first COVID lockdown, she brings her 2 now teenage daughters along. She says they're more her buddies. She keeps them close and they live at home with her. And she listens to them a lot.
Yeah, I'd say sometimes it's just like, don't put that in there, but
They're like, maybe don't use that one. Don't use that one tonight.
I'm happily divorced. Yeah. My ex was he was very cheap. And one time I was in the store. There's a true story. This actually happened. I was in the store. I was getting the pets. And he's like, do you really need those? And I'm looking at the package, and I'm looking at him, and I'm looking at the package. And I'm like, it says right here, always.
It might be a little cathartic, I suppose. I try not to think about him too much, honestly, as seldom as possible if I can avoid it. They say that, having a sense of humor is like a coping mechanism, but it doesn't feel like coping. It almost just feels like everyone has to look at life through some kind of lens, right? But if you can look at a lens that makes you laugh, that makes you a lot happier as a person,
Anyway, so that's my time. Guys, have a great night, okay, or day. Take care. Bye.
Next time on Becoming Muslim, when you become Muslim, what happens to your cultural identity?
We have to remember who we are as Latinos while we walk this path of Islam. Nowhere does it tell us to discard who we are.
That's next time on Becoming Muslim. Becoming Muslim is a project of the Spiritual Edge podcast at KALW Public Radio. Support for the series comes from the Templeton Religion Trust. Jeb Sharp is the editor, Tarek Foda is the sound engineer, Lindsay Myers-Humley is the digital content manager, Tom Levy is the photographer, our executive editor is Judy Silber. Thanks also to Katie McCutcheon and Jad Khalil for help with research for the series. We're grateful to the experts who helped us along the way, including Edward Curtis, Juliette Gallonier, Zarina Grewal, Sajida Jalalzai, Hind Mekki, Bashir Mohammed, Harold Morales, Spirit, and Kayla Wheeler. Pod ops by Megan Jones. Jeffrey Burke-Witten did our logo. Thank you to Ben Trefny, the news director at KALW, and to Matt Martin, who helped conceive of the series. To hear more stories from this series, check out our complete archive, including other stories about religion from around the world at thespiritualedge.org. We're also on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks for listening. I'm Hana Baba.